I didn't hear the trash bag tear at first. I was still half asleep, barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, running on that strange adrenaline you get the morning of something big. Graduation day. The day that was supposed to mean I made it. My cap and gown were hanging on the chair like proof that everything I survived had finally added up to something real. I remember thinking, just get through today. Just get through the ceremony. Then you're free. I reached for the envelope out of habit. The muscle memory of checking it was automatic, like touching a necklace to make sure it's still there. My fingers hit air. The counter was empty. Too empty. I opened the drawer where I'd tucked it the night before. Nothing. I checked my bag, my jacket pockets, the stack of mail. My heart started knocking harder. Not panic yet, just confusion. That thin, uncomfortable feeling that something is slightly off, but you're not ready to name it. Then I noticed the trash. The bag was fuller than it should have been. Tied, heavy, sitting there like it had been waiting for me. I don't know why I opened it. I think part of me already knew. I think my body moved before my brain could catch up, before it could protect me with denial. The smell hit first. Coffee grounds, old paper, something sticky. I pulled the bag open and started pushing things aside with my hands, not caring, not thinking, just searching. And then I saw it. White paper, bent at the corner, a flash of blue ink, my name. I froze. For a second the room went silent in a way that felt impossible, like all sound had been sucked out of the air. I pulled it out slowly, like it might disappear if I moved too fast. The envelope was ripped open. The ticket inside was folded wrong, creased down the middle, torn at the edge where someone had yanked it without care. My plane ticket to Paris. The words didn't make sense together. Plane ticket, trash, Paris, graduation day. My brain kept rearranging them, trying to form a version that didn't hurt. Maybe it was an old paper. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe. Then I saw the time printed on it. 5 hours. 5 hours before my graduation ceremony. 5 hours before the thing I'd been counting down to for 4 years. 5 hours before the moment everyone told me my life was supposed to begin. My hands started shaking so hard the paper rattled. I remember feeling embarrassed by that, even though I was alone, like my body was betraying me by reacting before I could decide how to feel. My throat tightened, not enough to cry, just enough to make it hard to swallow. I tasted metal. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out without asking. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around at first. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I saw her face, the last small part of me that still hoped this was a misunderstanding would finally die. "Why are you digging through the trash?" my mom said. Her voice was calm, casual, like she was asking about the weather. I turned then. She was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, leaning slightly against the frame. Not angry, not surprised, just settled, like this was already over. I held up the ticket. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "Why is this in the trash?" She looked at it, really looked at it, and then she shrugged. I threw it away. No hesitation, no apology, no explanation, just that. Something inside me cracked, but it didn't break cleanly. It splintered. I wanted to yell. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions at once. I wanted to scream that she had no right. But none of that came out. All I could think was, if I react wrong, this will somehow be my fault. "Why?" I asked. She sighed like I was exhausting her. Like I was a child who wouldn't stop asking for candy before dinner. "Because you're getting carried away," she said. "Paris can wait. You need to focus on real life." Real life. I looked down at the ticket again. This thing I had earned. Saved for. Planned quietly, carefully, so I wouldn't upset anyone. This thing that represented a single week where I wasn't someone's responsibility, someone's extension, someone's obligation. I thought about the nights I worked late, the times I skipped outings because I couldn't afford them, the way I kept my dreams small when I talked about them at home, rounding off the sharp edges so they wouldn't cut anyone else's comfort. And here it was, in the trash, like it had never mattered. "You had no right," I said, finally. Her expression hardened, just slightly, enough to remind me who had power here. "I'm your mother?" she said. "I know what's best." That was the moment it hit me. Not all at once. More like a slow, sinking realization that made my stomach twist. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't about timing or money or concern. This was about control. About reminding me, on the morning of my graduation, that even now, even after everything, my life still passed through her hands first. I stood there holding that torn ticket, trash clinging to the edges, my cap and gown visible behind her in the hallway. Two futures in the same frame, one discarded. The clock on the microwave blinked the time. It was still moving. The world hadn't stopped for my shock. I had somewhere to be, people waiting, smiles rehearsed, applause ready, and I realized something terrifying. If I didn't pick myself up in that moment, no one else was going to do it for me. So I folded the ticket carefully, even though it was already ruined. Even though I didn't know what I was going to do next. I folded it like it still mattered. And I walked past her. Not because I was okay, but because I was done letting my breaking point be invisible. Looking back, it didn't start with the ticket. That was just the loudest moment, the one that finally forced everything else into the open. The truth is, the control had been there for so long that it felt normal. Invisible, like gravity. You don't question it until something tries to lift you off the ground. Growing up, I learned early which parts of myself were acceptable. I learned it in small ways first. The way she'd smile when I chose something practical, and frown when I chose something I loved. The way excitement in my voice was met with silence if it didn't fit her idea of who I was supposed to be. No yelling. No dramatic fights. Just quiet corrections that taught me how to edit myself before anyone else had to. When I talked about dreams, I learned to soften them, to say, maybe, instead of, I want, to add jokes so they wouldn't sound serious, to watch her face closely and stop the moment her eyes glazed over or her mouth tightened. I became very good at that. At reading the room. At shrinking ambition into something that wouldn't cause discomfort. She never said, "You can't." She said, "That's unrealistic." She said, "People like us don't do that." She said, "You'll change your mind." Every sentence sounded reasonable. Caring even. That's how it worked. There was always just enough concern mixed in to make me doubt my own reactions. To make me wonder if I was the dramatic one, the ungrateful one, the child who didn't understand how the world worked. When I got into college, she told everyone how proud she was. She loved that part, the way it reflected well on her. But behind closed doors, the rules stayed the same. Stay close. Stay available. Don't get too independent. Don't make decisions that don't include her approval. If I stayed late on campus, she'd text repeatedly. Not angry messages. Just, "Are you okay?" Over and over until guilt replaced whatever freedom I'd been feeling. If I talked about studying abroad, she'd laugh lightly and say, "You'd hate it. You're too sensitive." If I succeeded at something, she'd remind me how hard it was going to get next. Like celebration was dangerous, like joy needed to be managed. I didn't realize how much of myself I was losing because it happened slowly, like erosion. One compromise at a time. One swallowed argument. One dream postponed because now wasn't the right time. By the time Paris entered the picture, I'd already trained myself to keep it quiet. I didn't tell her when I first started saving. I didn't tell her when I booked the ticket. I didn't tell her how much it meant to me. Not because I was hiding something wrong, but because experience had taught me that sharing joy invited interference. And even then, I still tried to make it palatable. "It's just a short trip," I said. "Just after graduation. Just something I've always wanted to see." I watched her reactions like a weather forecast. Calm on the surface, storm underneath. The way she'd change the subject. The way she'd sigh when my name came up in conversations about the future. The way she'd ask questions that sounded innocent, but were really designed to poke holes in my confidence. "Are you sure you can afford that? What if something happens? Wouldn't it be smarter to stay home for a while?" Each question landed softly, but together they built a cage. I didn't call it control back then. I called it concern. I told myself she was just worried, that this was what love looked like. That good children listened. That independence was something you earned slowly, carefully, with permission. The night before graduation, when she asked why I needed to leave so quickly after the ceremony, my stomach dropped. I could feel the shift before it happened. The air got heavier. Her tone changed, just slightly, the way it always did when I stepped outside the invisible boundaries she'd drawn for me. When I said Paris out loud, it felt like a confession. Like I was admitting to something selfish, something reckless. I waited for her reaction, holding my breath, already rehearsing apologies I didn't owe. That's the part that hurts the most to admit. I was already bracing myself, already prepared to be the problem. She didn't yell. She didn't forbid it outright. She just looked at me and said, "You're moving too fast." Too fast. After 4 years of grinding. Of surviving. Of doing everything right. That's when I should have seen it clearly. That it was never about timing. Or safety. Or realism. It was about keeping me within reach. About making sure that no matter how far I thought I'd come, I still needed her to validate the next step. The ticket in the trash wasn't a sudden act of cruelty, it was the final expression of a pattern. A quiet one. A polite one. A devastating one. She had spent years teaching me that my instincts were unreliable. That my desires needed supervision. That my independence was something to be delayed until further notice. So when she threw that ticket away, she wasn't just discarding paper. She was reinforcing a rule I'd been living under my entire life. You can succeed. But only as far as I let you. You can dream. But not where I can't follow. Standing there afterward, replaying every moment that led up to that morning, I finally understood why it hurt the way it did. Not just because I'd lost a trip, but because I could see the pattern clearly for the first time. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That realization didn't come with relief. It came with grief. Grief for the version of myself that kept trying to earn permission to live. Grief for all the moments I'd mistaken control for love, but it also came with something else. Something quiet. Something dangerous. Clarity. And clarity changes everything. We never had a screaming match about it. That's the part people don't understand when I try to explain. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation where I finally said everything I'd been holding in for years. What happened instead was quieter. Sharper. A kind of silence that cuts deeper, because it leaves no visible wounds. After I found the ticket in the trash. After she said she threw it away like she was talking about expired milk, the house went back to normal. Or at least, what passed for normal in our world. The clock kept ticking. The kettle boiled. She asked if I wanted breakfast. That almost broke me. Because how do you sit at a table and eat toast with someone who just erased something you loved? How do you pretend that nothing happened when something inside you has shifted permanently? I didn't yell. I didn't cry in front of her. I nodded. I kept my voice level. Years of practice kicked in. This was the version of me she preferred. The calm one, the reasonable one, the one who didn't make her uncomfortable with big emotions. Inside, though, everything was loud. Every thought crashed into the next. Say something. Don't say something. If you push too hard, she'll twist it. If you stay quiet, you're agreeing. I felt trapped between two terrible choices, both of which ended with me losing. She talked about logistics. What time we needed to leave for the ceremony. Who would be sitting where. Whether the weather would hold. She never mentioned the ticket again. Not directly. It was as if throwing it away had resolved the issue for her completely. That was the confrontation, not words. Not anger, erasure. At one point, she said, "You'll thank me later." She said it lightly, like a promise. Like this was something I would someday understand. I wanted to ask, thank you for what? For deciding my limits for me. For reminding me who holds the power. But I didn't. Because every time I'd challenged her in the past, it ended the same way. She'd sigh. She'd say I was being dramatic. She'd remind me of everything she'd done for me. And suddenly, I'd be defending myself instead of addressing what she did. So I stayed quiet. That silence wasn't peace. It was survival. On the drive to graduation, she played the radio. Some cheerful song that felt violently out of place. I stared out the window, watching the city pass by, wondering how many people were living inside moments just like this. Big, life-altering moments disguised as ordinary mornings. She reached over at a stoplight and adjusted my collar. A small, maternal gesture. Almost tender. I flinched. I don't think she noticed. When we arrived, people were everywhere. Families hugging. Cameras flashing. Laughter bouncing off concrete and glass. The noise should have drowned out my thoughts, but it didn't. If anything, it made the contrast sharper. Everyone celebrating beginnings, while I was quietly mourning something I hadn't even gotten to experience yet. She introduced me to people with pride in her voice. "This is my child. Graduating today," she smiled wide. "Accepted congratulations." Soaked it in, and I stood there, smiling too, feeling like a prop. During the ceremony, when my name was called, I walked across the stage on autopilot. I shook hands, took the diploma, heard applause. Somewhere in the crowd, she stood up, clapping enthusiastically. I wondered if she believed, in that moment, that she was a good mother. If she thought love and control were the same thing. When it was over, people hugged me and said, "You did it." I nodded. I said thank you. I let them take pictures. I posed next to my mom, our shoulders touching, our smiles perfectly aligned. No one could see the distance. Later, when we were alone again, she finally said something that sounded like an explanation. "You're not ready to be on your own like that," she said. "I'm just protecting you." Protecting me from what? From discovering who I was without her voice in my head. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a child being corrected. I felt like an adult being contained. "I didn't ask you to do that," I said quietly. Her face tightened, just a little. "Well, you didn't think it through," she replied. "Someone has to." That was it. That was the line. The one that made everything clear. She didn't see me as someone capable of choosing my own life. She saw me as a decision that needed managing. And still, I didn't explode. I didn't accuse her. I didn't list every time she'd crossed a line. I didn't demand an apology I knew I wouldn't get. Instead, I nodded again. And something inside me went very, very still. That was the moment I stopped trying to make her understand. The moment I realized that confrontation, in the way movies show it, was never going to happen here. She wasn't going to admit what she'd done. She wasn't going to reflect. She wasn't going to change because I found the right words. The power she had didn't come from volume. It came from confidence. from the belief that she was right by default. So I did the only thing left. I let her think she'd won. And while she relaxed, believing the issue was settled, I began to plan a future she wouldn't get to edit. The confrontation didn't end with raised voices. It ended with my silence becoming something else entirely. Not submission, preparation. Graduation was supposed to feel like a finish line. That's what everyone kept saying. Like once I crossed that stage, everything would finally make sense. Like the exhaustion would lift and the fear would turn into relief. But standing there in that crowd, cap pressing down on my head, diploma folder heavy in my hands, I felt strangely empty. As if I'd shown up for the wrong ceremony. People kept smiling at me, their faces bright with pride and expectation. They asked what I was doing next, their voices full of certainty, as if life after graduation followed a simple script: job, move, dream, thrive. I answered the same way every time, with a practiced half smile and a vague, "I'm figuring it out." No one questioned it. They nodded like that was a normal thing to say on a day that was supposed to mark clarity. Inside, though, I felt suspended, between what everyone could see and what I was actually carrying. Between applause and grief, my mom moved through the crowd like she belonged there. Accepting congratulations, laughing, telling stories about how hard the last 4 years had been on all of us. I watched people nod sympathetically at her, their attention pulled toward her version of the story. I stood beside her, quiet, invisible in my own milestone. That was the irony of it. I had achieved something real. Something I'd worked for with my whole body and mind. And yet, it felt like it didn't fully belong to me. When the ceremony ended, there was a moment where everyone surged forward at once. Families hugging, tears spilling, cameras clicking nonstop. Someone handed me flowers. Someone else wrapped their arms around me and whispered how proud they were. I wanted to feel it. I really did. But all I could think about was that torn ticket folded in my bag. That future that had almost happened. That version of myself who was supposed to be on a plane by now, watching the ground disappear beneath her. Instead, I was here, smiling, nodding, standing still. We took photos on the steps of the building. My mom stood close, her arm firm around my waist, pulling me in just a little tighter than necessary. She kept adjusting things, my cap, my hair, the angle of my shoulders, making sure everything looked right. At one point, she said, "You look so grown up," and laughed. It didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a reminder. Like even now, she was the one framing the picture. Later, when the crowd thinned and the noise softened, there was this strange quiet that settled over me. The kind that comes after something big ends, and you're left alone with yourself. The adrenaline drained away, and all that was left was heaviness. We drove home in silence. The same roads, the same traffic. Graduation didn't change the landscape at all. It didn't magically open doors or shift power. It just happened, and then it was over. That night, I sat on my bed in my cap and gown long after I should have taken them off. The fabric felt stiff and unfamiliar, like a costume. I held the diploma folder in my lap, running my fingers over the embossed letters, trying to connect to it emotionally. I kept thinking this was supposed to mean something. Instead, it felt like a performance. One where I hit my marks, said my lines, and bowed at the end, only to walk off stage and realize the script for the next act had already been written by someone else. My phone buzzed with messages, friends posting photos, captions about new beginnings, freedom, adventure. I scrolled through them slowly, feeling both happy for them and painfully distant from it all. My mom knocked on my door and came in without waiting for an answer. She smiled at me, soft and satisfied. "See," she said. "Everything worked out." I looked at her and wondered what "worked out" meant to her. That I stayed. That I didn't leave. That the plan she was comfortable with remained intact. I nodded, because that was easier. After she left, I finally took off the cap and set it on the desk. I folded the gown carefully, like I was packing away something fragile. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the ticket. It was still torn, still creased, still unusable. I smoothed it out anyway. That's when it hit me. Not all at once, but steadily, undeniably. Graduation wasn't the victory I thought it would be. It didn't free me. It didn't protect me. It didn't even expose the problem. It highlighted it. I realized how easy it was for people to celebrate my achievements while ignoring my autonomy. How success, on its own, didn't mean control over my own life. How applause could coexist with powerlessness. That understanding hurt more than the ticket ever did. Because it meant that if I wanted more, real independence, real freedom, it wasn't going to be handed to me by milestones or ceremonies or approval. I was going to have to take it. Quietly. Carefully. Without asking. Graduation didn't mark the end of something. It marked the moment I stopped believing that doing everything right would be enough. And in that realization, painful as it was, something shifted. The emptiness I felt wasn't just loss, it was space. Space where a different future could exist. For a long time, I kept replaying the moment in the kitchen like it was the only thing that mattered. The trash. The ticket. Her voice saying she threw it away. I told myself that was the betrayal. That if it hadn't happened, everything would have been fine. That if she hadn't crossed that line, I wouldn't feel this way. But the truth took longer to surface. It came in quiet moments. In the days after graduation, when the house went back to its usual rhythm, and I noticed how small my world felt. How carefully my movements stayed within invisible borders. How often I paused before speaking, even when no one had asked me to. I realized the ticket wasn't the wound. It was the proof. Proof of something I had spent years trying not to see. Because if it was just about the ticket, I could forgive it. I could explain it away. I could tell myself she panicked, made a bad choice, acted out of fear. That version of the story would let me stay comfortable. Loyal. Quiet. But when I looked deeper, I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. Every time I tried to step forward, something pulled me back. Not violently. Gently, with reason. With guilt. With reminders of everything I owed. Every time I felt confident, there was a comment that softened it. Every time I felt brave, there was a warning dressed up as love. The ticket was just the most visible example of something that had been happening in subtler ways my entire life. I started noticing how often my decisions weren't really mine. How often I waited for approval before trusting my own instincts. How often I measured my wants against someone else's comfort before letting myself want them at all. That realization was devastating, because it meant I hadn't just lost a trip to Paris. I had lost years of self-trust. I had been taught, slowly and consistently, that my judgment was flawed, that my desires were impulsive, that my independence was dangerous unless supervised. And somewhere along the way, I had absorbed those messages so deeply that I no longer questioned them. Until now. Until the morning she threw my future in the trash and expected me to understand. That's when the fog lifted. I stopped asking myself why she did it and started asking why I had believed, for so long, that this was normal. I thought about all the times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. All the times I'd stayed when I wanted to leave. All the opportunities I'd talked myself out of because I didn't want to deal with the aftermath of asserting myself. I thought about how careful I'd been, how good, how obedient, and how none of it protected me. That realization hurt more than anger ever could. Because anger still gives you something to push against. This was grief. Grief for the version of myself that thought love meant shrinking. That thought being low, Maintenance was the same thing as being valued. I saw myself differently after that. Not as someone who had failed to stand up for themselves in one moment, but as someone who had been trained not to. And with that understanding came a strange sense of relief. Because if this wasn't a personal flaw, if it was conditioning, then it could be unlearned. If the ticket didn't represent rebellion, it represented agency, and that was the real threat. I realized she hadn't been trying to stop me from traveling. She had been trying to stop me from realizing I didn't need permission anymore. Once I saw that, I couldn't go back to the old narrative, the one where I was dramatic, ungrateful, confused, the one where her fear was my responsibility to manage. I started paying attention to how she reacted when I made small choices without consulting her. What I ate, when I went out, how I spent my time. Even tiny acts of independence were met with tension, silence, passive remarks, and suddenly it all made sense. The control wasn't loud because it didn't need to be. It had been reinforced for years through subtle pressure and emotional consequences, through approval and withdrawal, through love that felt conditional on compliance. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. I was waking up. That realization didn't make things easier right away. If anything, it made them heavier. Because once you see the truth, you have to carry it. You have to decide what to do with it. And pretending you don't know anymore becomes impossible. I stopped trying to convince her, stopped rehearsing arguments in my head, stopped hoping for validation that I now understood would never come. Instead, I turned inward. I asked myself questions I'd never been allowed to ask before. What do I actually want? What feels right to me? What would I choose if no one else's opinion mattered? The answers didn't come all at once. At first, they were faint, uncertain, like muscles that hadn't been used in a long time. But they were there, and they were mine. The ticket didn't teach me that my mother was capable of hurting me. I already knew that, even if I hadn't admitted it. It taught me that I was capable of seeing the truth. And that changed everything. Because once you understand that control can wear the face of love, you stop confusing obedience with safety. You stop mistaking silence for peace. You stop believing that being chosen means being owned. I didn't confront her with this realization. I didn't sit her down and explain it. I didn't demand acknowledgement. I didn't need to. The shift happened quietly. Internally, permanently. The ticket stayed folded in my drawer for weeks after that. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but as a reminder of what I learned. That my life was never meant to be managed. That my dreams were never meant to be filtered through someone else's fear. That the real betrayal wasn't what she did that morning. It was how long I'd been taught to accept it. I didn't leave in a dramatic way. There were no suitcases lined up by the door, no final speech, no slammed doors or tearful goodbyes. If anything, it looked like nothing had changed at all. And that was intentional. Because by the time I decided to go, I understood something very clearly. Freedom didn't need an announcement. I started planning quietly. Not in one bold decision, but in small, careful steps. The kind you take when you've learned that visibility invites interference. I opened a new email account she didn't know about. I rerouted important messages. I kept my plans to myself, even when my heart burned to share them with someone, anyone. Silence became a tool instead of a weakness. On the outside, I stayed the same. Polite, cooperative, predictable. I followed routines. I answered questions without offering details. I let her believe that the future was unfolding the way she expected it to. And because she believed she had won, she stopped watching so closely. That was the moment I began to breathe again. I saved money the same way I always had, but now it felt different. Each dollar wasn't just practical. It was symbolic. Proof that I was building something she couldn't touch. I researched flights at night, headphones on, volume low. I read about places I'd never been, imagined streets I'd never walked, futures that felt impossibly far away and suddenly within reach. There were moments I almost told her, moments when habit kicked in and I felt the urge to seek approval, to test the waters, to see if maybe this time would be different. But I remembered the ticket in the trash. And I stayed quiet. The hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was the emotional withdrawal. The slow, deliberate act of untangling myself from someone who had been at the center of my world for so long. I grieved while sitting across from her at dinner. I grieved in my room at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling guilty for wanting a life that didn't revolve around her. I questioned myself constantly. Am I cruel for doing this? Am I selfish? Am I wrong for not explaining? But then I'd remember how explaining had never protected me before. How honesty had always been used as leverage. How vulnerability became a weakness in the wrong hands. So I chose myself instead. The day I booked the new ticket, my hands shook just like they had in the kitchen weeks earlier. But this time, the shaking felt different. Not like fear, like power. Like standing on the edge of something terrifying and choosing not to step back. I didn't print it. I didn't leave it anywhere it could be found. I memorized the details and deleted the confirmation email. I learned how to move without leaving traces. As the departure date got closer, the house felt smaller. Every familiar sound carried weight. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, her footsteps in the hallway. I moved through it all like a ghost, present but already gone. She talked about future plans like they were settled. Where I'd be living. What I'd be doing. What made sense. I nodded along, feeling a strange mix of sadness and clarity. She wasn't lying. She truly believed this was how things would go. And that was the hardest part. The night before I left, I barely slept. I lay awake listening to the house breathe around me, memorizing it. Not because I wanted to stay, but because I needed to acknowledge what I was leaving behind. Not just walls and routines, but a version of myself that had survived by staying small. I packed lightly. Only what I needed. Nothing sentimental. I didn't want objects pulling me backward. I wanted to move forward unencumbered. In the early morning, while it was still dark, I stood in my room and took one last look around. I didn't feel dramatic. I felt steady. Like a decision had already been made long ago, and I was simply honoring it now. I left without saying goodbye. Not because I didn't care, but because saying goodbye would have turned into an argument. A negotiation. A moment where I'd be asked to justify myself, to soften my choice, to reassure her that nothing was really changing. Everything was changing. At the airport, surrounded by strangers and rolling suitcases, I felt strangely calm. For the first time, no one knew me as someone's child. No one expected me to behave a certain way. I was just a person with a destination. When the plane took off, I didn't cry. I watched the ground fall away and felt something inside me settle into place. Not happiness, relief, she found out later. Not immediately. There were messages, confusion. Then anger. Then silence. I didn't respond right away. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fix it. The consequences were exactly what I expected. Accusations. Guilt. Stories told to others where I was ungrateful, impulsive, selfish. I heard about them secondhand and felt the familiar urge to defend myself rise up. And then fade. Because I finally understood something that changed everything. People who benefit from your silence will always resent your independence. I didn't lose a mother that day. I lost the illusion that love requires permission. The distance didn't heal everything. It didn't magically erase years of conditioning. But it gave me space. Space to think without interference. To choose without fear. to exist without being managed. And slowly, quietly, I began to build a life that felt like my own. Not loud, not perfect, but honest. I still think about that first ticket sometimes. The one that ended up in the trash. I don't hate that version of the story anymore. Because without it, I might never have understood what I was really being asked to give up. And I never would have left